And so we return and begin again. Hello, welcome to the Invisible Podcast. My name's Bobsy. We are going page by page, issue by issue, theory by theory, panel by panel, whatever by whatever, through Grant Morrison's Cosmic Conspiracy classic of ye 90s, The Invisibles. Yeah, that's how we're rolling. That's what we're doing. We are on to Issuesode 7. Here's the Sean Phillips cover. We have a rose with petals, and a dainty lady's hand holding it. We have a scary sort of gloved hand holding a cattle brand, and the way they've kind of lined up the cattle brand quite nicely with where the barcode for the issue goes is pretty good. It all ties in together quite well with the contents of the issue inside, except that's a rose, and inside the flower being plucked with falling petals is not a rose, it's a daffodil. Onto issue check. Pretty sturdy, holding up over the quarter century quite well, really, all things considered. I don't think you can see it necessarily, but there's a little bit. I was eating fish and chips while reading this the other night, and so there's a little bit of chip grease on this issue, but we don't mind that. Let's get into it then. Before we start the issue, of course, we have to look at our first advert, which is this one here. It is for Sandman Mystery Theatre. The big headline is, "All he wants is his pound of flesh." Night of the Butcher. Issues 25 to 28, beginning in February 95, that would be. The Sandman is like from 1939, Wesley Dodds. One of the earliest superheroes, one of those who kind of emerged from the very early superhero comic books, kind of almost from the pulps into fully fledged superherodom, which he was then kind of kicked out of in the 60s before being resurrected in the 80s, kind of by the work of that guy, Neil Gaiman again, who we crop up with, or who crops up rather, quite often in these adverts at least. This one isn't by him, it's by Matt Wagner, Stephen T. Siegel, and Guy Davis. Matt Wagner, famous for, the kind of the 80s adult, not adult, just kind of like, darkish, superhero story. Grendel, lots of great formal experimentation in that. A little bit too much cursive script that was really difficult to read, and kind of held Grendel back from the fame and well, it got lots of acclaim, but from the fame and kind of like kind of like retirement time money that it would have otherwise deservedly got, I think. I don't think Matt Wagner's kind of like starving or anything, hopefully, so that doesn't matter too much. And he also worked on this thing, Sandman Mystery Theatre, which was like a gritty 20s, 30s, I guess, reboot of the Sandman. As we can see, it's quite interesting. This is the Night of the Butcher. He's got he's a guy here with a cleft palate. He's all ever so scary. He's got a meat cleaver and a butcher's hook. And our guy Wesley, the Sandman, looks unnervingly like one of the Cypher Men who we met last issue and who we're going to come up again, spoilers, who we're going to meet again this issue. The Sandman's bag is that he has spooky dreams about the crimes that he's then going to go on and solve. And that comes kind of, that's been in the like post Gaiman, that's come from the other Sandman and Dream of the Endless, Morpheus, who controls dreams. It looks ever so chilly, doesn't it? There's something a little bit pleasingly non-heroic about the way that the Sandman here is pulling his trench coat about him as if it's a bit chilly, and yes, there may be a maniac on the loose with sharp implements, but also he could catch a terrible chill, I've never read this comic. I'm sure it's probably all right, but probably maybe a bit worthy and boring as well. If I live to be 1,000 years old, I'll definitely get round to reading it. If I don't, no promises, okay? I hope that's okay to you Sandman Mystery Theatre fans out there. Hope I'm not offending anybody. Okay, so let's get into it then. This is The Invisibles, issue 7, published in March 1995, according to the Indicia, the Indicia. And we start with this page here. Page 1 is basically it sets us up for the place where we're going to have a lot of the action in this issue, which is like a kind of invisibilized 120 Days of Sodom and Gomorrah or 120 Days of Sodom, I think it is, but I always say Sodom and Gomorrah, by the Marquis de Sade. Probably his most famous text, kind of not necessarily as useful or as readable even as Justine, but the one which is like so super awful, horrible that his kind of like reputation, his infamy, is somewhat rests upon it. And the story is, if you don't know, but you probably do know because you've read this, four like rulers, four men of authority and power, lock themselves into the castle of Silling, over which is kind of based on like the Marquis de Sade's kind of like home, childhood ancestral home. They gather like a load of sex workers and a load of just like children who they've kidnapped off the streets and a load of like evil servants, and they just kind of indulge every sadistic pleasure that they can. They suspend all the rules of law and morality, and really throw themselves into types of depravity which haven't really been explored before by man. These four kings. Okay, we're gonna draw an interesting parallel here between the four kings invocation of the demonic rulers of the universe, of the physical universe, who our guy Etienne Mehul, the invisible, was invoking, and kind of when he was invoking them, he got King Mob in the team, right? Those four demon guys are very much like. They're very like ambivalent. They're very ancient and not human and not baddies, really. Just like no more baddies than nature is bad, than the wind is bad. These guys, the human kind of like one step down into fleshland of that, bad. Very straightforward. Bad guys. The banker, the judge, the bishop, and the duke, representing the various poles of temporal and spiritual power by which human relations, certainly Western European human relations, are maintained via money, the judiciary, the church, and land, aristocracy, and its ownership. The further bit here is to mention Sallow, the Pasolini movie from 1975, which remade the story, de Sade's book, into like a movie set in Nazi Germany, where some Nazi high command guys do the same thing, lock themselves in a castle with a bunch of innocent people and fuck shit up quite horribly. I haven't read, or I've skimmed it. Like King Mob said in the last issue, nobody ever reads them properly, but skim it. It wasn't that hard. Skimmed 120 Days of Sodom. Haven't watched Sallow. Honestly, I've only got limited time to watch stuff for me on the telly box, and I wasn't going to do it. I didn't want to do it. It looked nasty. Didn't want to do it. I didn't want to potentially depress myself. I'm recording this in May 2019, and Game of Thrones only just finished. What was I going to do? Miss that and watch Sallow instead? No. But that kind of updates the 120 Days of Sodom story into a World War II Nazi context. Morrison here is moving it up into a 90s Invisibleoid one. So there are certain kind of although it putatively is within de Sade's original story, which was written in 1780 odd. The cat's coming in. Don't worry, guys. It's just the cat. In 1780 odd, it was updated by Pasolini for Sallow, and Morrison's doing the same thing here. So we have anachronistic business suits and dollars and here. And I didn't watch Sallow. I'm not that familiar with Pasolini. The only book of his that I've read is Petrolio, about a man who is not made of petrol, but who is symbolically very like petrol. I think it's an incredibly useful book for understanding, late 20th century geopolitics and its and the political economy's insistence upon oil as the ultimate commodity. Give it a read. You can just find it. Then on to page 2, the guys. The evil guys, they put their cloaks on. They kind of undress and redress themselves as the masters of the castle, which is quite weird, because they were that anyway, and then they dressed themselves as that, or maybe they weren't there beforehand. They have these interesting face paint things going on here, which are very much like our invisible friend Ragged Robin's face paint, and it's almost like maybe they weren't real before. Maybe they were just mannequins before the story started, right? Are they? Is it really that useful a way to interrogate power now? I mean, yeah, I think so. The banker and the judge, obviously, those are terribly important. The bishop, the legacy, if not the kind of the actual living belief in Western cultures of the power of the church, is still very strong and with us. The duke, again, I mean, as wonderful it is to think that the events of the French Revolution and the Treaty of Westphalia and just like the creation of the modern Western state did strip away some of the temporal power of the aristocracy. Not really. The way that they kind of overlap with the banker these days arguably makes them, somewhat contiguous. But it's fine. We'll run with it. If you were writing it now, you wouldn't do that. You'd have code, right, on the nose, as one of the people. You'd have the code guy. You'd have the IT guy being one of the people. More on that later. More on the code guy later. So they kind of give you a description of what's going on here. They're going to lock themselves in the castle. With them are 3 wives, 1 daughter, 4 whores, who to nightly discourses will serve to inflame our lust, 4 ugly crones, 8 lusty men, and 60 lost souls kidnapped from their families. Also, 3 cooks and 3 scullery maids, because they got to eat. They're going to seal themselves in for 4 months over the course of a winter. God is banned here. Law is banned here. Everything is banned here except for their taken power. They're pantomiming their own roles as these people of power, and they're just taking it because they can, because they've got a big fat old castle wall between them and retribution, between them and justice or God or care. Let it begin. And the walls of the castle, the gates of the castle shut, and then we have, just coming in from off panel, a guy going, shit, this isn't really what I'd hoped for. And we're on to our splash page. And that was King Mob who was saying shit. And it was him who was saying, this isn't really what I'd hoped for. And we're on to Arcadia, Part 3, 120 Days of Sod All. Let's do the credits. Grant Morrison, writer. Jill Thompson, pencils. Dennis Kramer on inks. Daniel Votso on colours. Clem Robbins doing the letters. Julie Rottenberg, the assistant editor to Stuart Moore, the editor. And The Invisibles, of course, as we know by now, was created by Grant Morrison. And as you can see, pardon me, they have kind of landed in Les Bergères d'Arcadie, the Poussin painting, the 1837-38 version, not the 1820-odd version. 1620 version, not the earlier version. As you remember, Poussin painted this painting twice. This is like the later, more refined one, the one where it's a bit less like they've just all been doing it. But we're here now. Okay, why on earth are they here? It's a very confusing scene, because last we knew of these guys, they were time traveling in pre-revolutionary France, and they've just kind of revolutionary France, and they were trying to move back through time, but we knew that Orlando was back in the time machine messing with stuff, and that's kind of like changed everything. But somehow they've ended up in this painting. Now remember, he does explain. It's bizarre because frankly, it's wonderful. This issue, because of this kind of device that it's using, does have an extra element of sort of narrative interest that the previous one didn't have. The previous one had some really good bits, really strong, some particular pages, really did have some strong stuff in them. But overall, there's a bit of a dirgy feel to the reading experience. This one, with the way it kind of throws itself into these comic book alienation techniques, like this kind of comic book Brett stuff, which Morrison had kind of road tested several times with the Doom Patrol, where they were kind of getting, they get sucked into a painting every other issue. It brings an extra layer of one of separation, so you're not kind of just, so that you don't feel too much like you're stuck in the castle of Silling with these 4 horrible guys. But also, there's that layer of commentary. but it's just kind of fun. So it places Decade and King Mob and Boy as the kind of the narrators or the chorus for the stuff that's going on, and it provides these extra layers of reality, and it works really quite nicely as a reading experience, even though the stuff that's happening in this issue is grim. It's a really grim issue, and it's horrible. And it's meant to be, and it's giving you a moral lesson through the representation of horror. You may have your own ideas about whether that's kind of like an effective thing to do. I kind of, I pivot on that as I want to do. But yeah, generally I kind of buy the moral argument that you can educate people as to the right ways of doing and being by showing them horrible things. Yeah, sure, why not? And this issue does do that. It does show horrible things. Over the page, onto page 3. Are we calling it 3? No, it's 4. Sorry, according to the numbers, it's page 4. It's page 4. They have a little bit of explo about where they are. How the hell did they end up here? Decade says, "It's like I'm dreaming and my body is somewhere else asleep." Imagine the French accent. "I can feel the sun, smell the cut grass, but it's like dreaming." And Boy's like, "It's just us. Where are the others? What's happened?" And King Mob is kind of thinking about it. "We're in the ontic sphere. It looks like the zone has taken an imprint off that bloody postcard." If you remember, he had a postcard, the one that Orlando had sent him, the reproduction of the Et in Arcadia ego, the Shepherds of Arcadia, the Poussin painting that we've just been talking about. King Mob had a copy of that in his pocket, sent to him by Orlando, which I kind of think, I hadn't really noticed this before, but this is part of Orlando's trap, was to give them something which would mess up their journey back from the time travel. Orlando's got really good intel. Okay. So they're using this postcard to get their way home from revolutionary France through the kind of, just through the mind zone, through the dreamland, through spirit, into the present day, back home. And now they're kind of stuck in this place, which King Mob calls the ontic sphere, and they're going to have to journey their way through it, right? They're going to have to dream work their way out of it. They're going to have to find the path home through the poesis, if you like, that's here. The ontic sphere. Okay. Oh yeah, we've got to jump ahead here a little bit. So, in the letters page, which we will get to later, as normal, the intro bit is quite interesting, but and kind of annoying, but it's quite interesting. It's a little bit patronising, but it's quite interesting. It's nice to have. One of the things that good pop culture does, or certainly did, was now you can just Google stuff, doesn't matter. But back then, you had no way to find your way through culture if the culture that you had in your hand didn't scatter these little breadcrumb trails to help you go and see what the next thing you should read is. The Manic Street Preachers did that brilliantly in all of their music. So did Dexys Midnight Runners and Public Enemy. Like big kind of like high concept bands would kind of often feel obliged to stick lots of references to other things on their album artwork and stuff, so as to kind of help you, so as to just kind of justify their thinking almost, and kind of help you kind of catch the vibe of what they're all about and what their stuff's all about. I don't think it pops up quite so much anymore because everything is everywhere and everyone knows it. But here, Morrison's provided a neat little reading list, a little bibliography of the stuff that this Arcadia storyline is about. Now, this helps me know what the hell ontic sphere means, because one of the references here is the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook by Michael Bertillot. And there's a bit of a pickle. There's a lot to talk about. Oh no, this is going to be a long episode, isn't it? I'm sorry. Yeah, it is. We're in the ontic sphere. Now, ontic in kind of ontology just means stuff. Yeah, bookcase. Not the idea of bookcases, but bookcase. Real things that are apparent and manifest. That's what ontic means. Michael Bertillot, for some reason I keep wanting to say Michel, but I think it is Michael. He's an American, although kind of American from a French family. Michael Bertillot wrote a book called The Voodoo Gnostic Workbook in 1988, which, at this point, it was only 7 years old by the time it kind of like gets refed here in the Invisibles, but it had only been printed, it only had a very small print run. Your occult magic scene thought it was very hip, and so it kind of sold out. All the print run sold out, and kind of very quickly entered into like legend as being this like super creepy, scary black magic book. At the time, it was by this time, by like within a decade of its publication, lots of people were cross with it and cross with Berthiaud because they were concerned that he was trying to pass this book of his off as like authentic voodoo or vaudin, and the cat's being a pickle tonight. Look at him, and it's okay. I'm just going to ignore it and push through. Berthiaud wasn't trying to do that, basically. What he was doing was he wasn't trying to do like real voodoo, even though he had been, he'd been to Haiti, he'd been initiated as he'd done plenty of voodoo-y stuff. He was trying to splice it more particularly with like post-Crowleyanity, so Thelema and the Kenneth Grant mythos, yeah. So yeah, Berthiaud would get accused of doing something which I don't think he really was. He wasn't actually saying at any point he was doing like vaudou. He wasn't doing like Haitian religious practices. He was taking elements of them, splicing them with, doing the syncretic work of the Western occult tradition, basically. And one understands he did it probably pretty well. According to his Wikipedia page, he worked as a social worker for 40 years in the Haitian community in Chicago. Like I said, probably queer. Seems like a pretty good guy. Seems like a pretty good guy, really, as far as these things go. Seems kind of decent. But at the time, referencing this book was kind of doing two things. One, it was like saying this is edgy, scary, dark magic, deep in, right? Deep in. And it kind of opened one up to accusations of cultural appropriation, which, like I said, I don't think are kind of justified, but it heightened and the book's reputation for being something which was kind of awful and kind of scary and something you shouldn't go near. The ontic sphere itself, per the reference that King Mob gives it here, is kind of like the space where the Aeon, according to the Voodoo Gnostic workbook, the space where the Aeon overlaps or kind of comes into contact with the Logos. Aeon is like the zeitgeist, the emanation of space energy, right? Far deep cosmic energies with nebulae and things, like actual objects bathe the universe in these very complex and big energy structures that hit the Earth. And obviously these things are coming from all over the planet, all over the universe, and hitting Earth all at once. And they started squillions of years ago. So at any one time, Earth is under the influence of several overlapping, mingling aeons. The Logos is kind of a bit more kind of pure than that, kind of the word of God, yeah. So kind of like the meaning or intent of creation itself. Where these things meet and become manifest in the human spirit land, imaginative realm, is the ontic sphere. I think that's kind of what I'm making of it. Apologies if I'm wrong, but I think it sounds roughly like that. But so that's kind of where we are. It looks like the zone's taken an imprint off that bloody postcard. Like I say, Christ, what went wrong? Nobody knows our time travel codes, do they? This is all part of Orlando's scheme, I think. It's a clever trap to get them to split the team and get them all lost deep in the ontic sphere. Mob says, the enemy don't have Gnostic engineers with that kind of skill. There's no way their head hackers could have breached our circle. This is really cool. This is really cool stuff of like the baddies, who, as we know, are basically like cops and politicians, are in a head hacking occult spy game with the Invisibles, who've got far fewer resources, but they've got madder skills. This is a pain in the arse. We're going to have to follow it as we go through. So yeah, that's the end of the page. And a nice little chance to think about the Voodoo Gnostic workbook, which I hadn't done for ages, and a nice little digression there. Desade is kind of like still sort of interested in this dreamland. And that kind of takes us back to the previous page, really. So what the hell is this picture about? Why is it of such significance to this comic book, right? And I thought I had the answer, and then I realised later on in this issue you actually get given another bit of the puzzle. So I thought this was definitely the right space to talk about this painting in some depth, but actually I'm not sure if it is, because I think there might be stuff in the next issue which is going to seem even more relevant and timely to the discussion of the painting. What I'm going to say is, these guys, so these are the shepherds of Arcadia. So these are like pre-civilized Greek guys, even though their dress in this version of the painting bespeaks a level of culture. Yeah, the symbolic work that the painting is doing is saying these people are emerging from a space prior to the emergence of human civilization, prior to the emergence of the city. Yeah, they have been doing it. Basically, they've been enjoying themselves in a very country kind of way, countryside-y kind of way. And they've discovered this tomb that says "Et in Arcadia ego" in it, and it is basically death saying to them, "Don't get too happy because I'm right around the corner." It's a memento mori, right? This is still there's still like medieval Europe, still coping with plagues and stuff. Totally goth, totally death obsessed. Half of Europe dying, that kind of thing. But these Greek dudes are studying several things at once. So they're studying the writing, they're studying the shadow that they are casting upon this tomb, and they're studying the fact of the tomb itself, the fact of death. And so they're confronting death, shadows, right? Shadows have been a thing in our previous episodes of Arcadia, and the unconscious. Basically, this is the civilizing moment. To cut a long story short, this is the civilizing moment. This is the point where bumpkins, stupid rural shepherds, discovered the existence of a world, of a type of imagistic world, of pictorial storytelling language. It's a comic, remember, yeah? A pictorial storytelling language that existed outside of them, and that they could participate in the creation of and be reflexively created by. So this is the discovery of art itself, of symbolic language itself, and it's deep stuff, right? So it's that contact with death, which is kind of like a gloss for the unconscious self at the same time, right? The shadow, literally, this prefigured young by a long way, but by noticing for the first time their shadow and how it relates to death, it gives them the idea for representational art, and art as like the highest form of civilization, and therefore civilization itself can begin. That's what this painting is about. However, then later on there's more stuff about what the painting means. But that's where we're starting. So this is in a way this is like non-Christian, not Garden of Eden, but it's non-Christian Genesis. Yeah, this is like pagan. How did we get brains? Yeah, it's kind of that. Pagan Garden of Eden, pagan Genesis. What the hell are you talking about, Bobsy? Why do they move so slowly? And our attention is drawn to that at the bottom of page 4. On to page 5. They trot up the hill towards the castle of Silling. And Desader's like, "Oh my God, what's going on? This is so weird." And it is. And King Mob and Boy are both kind of like, "Oh, it's a bit of a pain in the ass." And it's nice. It's nice they're kind of, King Mob is like cynical. Boy is frustrated. Desade is just like wild with wonder. The way that they kind of bumble through this nasty and bizarre arty landscape is good. Pretty much anything can happen here. To say we're at the mercy of the way in which the Ontic Highway, I'm guessing that the Ontic Highway is in the Ontic sphere, chooses to manifest itself in response to our subconscious requirements. Dig? Not really, but I think that's kind of, I think so. If this space is created by where cosmic energy and God energy, either the Eon and the Logos overlap, then they have a kind of a direct line to these three's subconscious, which is obviously Desade's subconscious. So we're in one of his fictions. Also, the subconscious that Boy and Mob had, because they were both fixating on this painting as a trigger or a key to find their way home from revolutionary France. And, they're at the mercy of the way in which the Ontic Highway chooses to manifest itself in response to their subconscious requirements. So that's what's going on here. And it's nice. It's a nice bit of, like, poetic license taken with these far-out concepts. The way that Desade describes the kind of the strangeness of the trance that he's in, and the way that he can feel the sun, smell the grass, that kind of, like, can I thing will be familiar to anybody who's done any kind of journeying work or dream work, or just had a dream, because you're like, what was that? Was that the memory of a smell? Where did that? Was I creating a smell out of nothing? Was I creating the exact replica of actual molecules of stuff hitting my nasal receptors? Anyway, it's crazy spooky magic shit, guys. Fucking voodoo magic, man. Yeah, Predator 2. Back in on page 6, we're in the time travel windmill. Remember, Orlando had just chopped off Dane's finger. Drip, 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 drip. Yuck, does it hurt? It does hurt, doesn't it? Look at it, he's really tormenting him, it's horrible. And he eats it. He eats the little tip of Jack's finger that he's cut off. And that is rank, obviously, and wakes Jack up. Ah! He wakes up with full Scouse fury. On to the next page, we've got an advert for the Embrace. I think we covered that last week, our last episode rather. It's like Vampire Diary, the Embrace. Yeah, kind of like a meta text about vampires, meta fiction rather about vampires, a vampire. We definitely spoke about it previously, but it has appeared here, and I think the way that it kind of tries to do a hyperstitional thing maybe fits in quite well with what's happening here. Yeah, the way that these guys, the way that Mob and Desade and Boy are relating as fictional characters, are relating to another layer of fictivity within their own experience, is a bit like, by analogy, what it's like for us to read these hyperstitional metafictions, which I assume the Vampire Diary, the Embrace, is I don't know. I haven't read it, so it could be brilliant. I'm going to say though, by just going from the advert, I'm going to say it's a likably crude effort to do, yeah, to create like a text within texting. So Jack, page 7, springs to life. He bangs into Orlando and takes him by surprise and knocks him over. And he's like, oh fucking hell. But Orlando quickly recovers, bashes him. You're mine. I like it when you struggle. So hell, wake up, eh? Fuck's sake, man! He cut me finger off. And one of them does wake up, and it is our friend here, Lord Fanny, bless her. And at this point, Orlando has gone full Cenobite. I understand. Like, okay, so sometimes it looks like a smudge, basically. His face looks a bit like a cool smudge. He hasn't got the mask that he had on beforehand. And I understand if you dig into this stuff, there is a fair amount of dissatisfaction on Jill Thompson's part about the way that the inking made him look here. I think it works really well. I think the look of kind of like surprise on his face there is dumb and good. It feels like how that Cenobite makeup in the first two Hellraiser films feels, which is that it's obviously a bit fake and latex and silly, and yet it's still there. And the fact that you're having to confront this wet, cheap silliness is kind of the thing that makes it so icky, right? So the fact that he is a bit badly drawn here makes him look a bit like an actual Cenobite, which is really like he's definitely doing Clive Barker Cenobite dialogue here. The bastard's killing me. Killing you? Oh yes, but could you imagine how I kill? The things I show you at the end. I'll peel the flesh from your bones and destroy the others left in your soft skin, screaming with your voice. He's like a talky, sadistic demon villain guy. And he's pleasure, pain, flesh, bombs. He's really got that Pinhead vibe to him. And Jack is banging his chopped off finger on his head, but that's not going to stop him. But Fanny's there. Put him down. I can't do her Brazilian accent. Put him down now, or I swear I'll kill you. And he's there, and with showing a certain amount of sass, Orlando says, "Really? What are you going to do? Stab me with your high heels?" And she goes, "Yep." And then this is one of the best moments that we've had in this comic so far. She literally wallops him in the either in the side of the head or right in the eye with a white high heel stiletto, and it really fucks him up. And she's like, "Yeah, I will stab with my high heels." And it looks like it goes in really deep. Yeah, it looks like she really sort of buries the heel in his head, and it's great. It's really good. We're deep into a fairly, this is chewy and stuffy, this comic, and the last one especially. But Morrison can still do a rad action scene just like that. He can just pull one out of the air. And this is, a trans woman, like, really bringing it to a Cenobite with her high heels. It's really cool. The Clive Barker thing definitely isn't an accident. Like, Clive Barker was all over people like Grant Morrison and Alan Moore really wanted to be Clive Barker at this point. Really wanted to. Because he was like, he was like them but famous and rich, which they weren't yet. Then we've got, over the page, we've got this awesome Beavis and Butthead advert. Stick it in, press play. Hey Butthead, Hollywood. Like, this was when their movie had come out or something. I don't really know what it's. Oh yeah, okay, so it's an advert for MTV's home video label, where their cartoons, of which obviously this one, Liquid TV, and this was Beavis and Butthead was like the main ones. They were coming out on video. Do you remember videos? You don't remember videos. No one does. What are they? The gurus of mutant mayhem take on the hassles of work and go commando on neighbour Tom Anderson in these two outrageous compilations. The trends, the 1994, the year in rock. The trends, the news, and the absurdity of the world of rock during the year that was. The best of Liquid TV, the best in underground animated anarchy. So it's all of a piece, and the way you've got these stars is interesting, isn't it? Given what we know about, cosmic energies and aeonics. This is obviously, I guess this is Hollywood Boulevard, right? Where you get your star. Beavis and Butthead being anarchic and alienated. Doesn't it? Yeah, it kind of fits. It kind of fits quite well. The yellow graffiti, we'll get to a bit of yellow in a minute. And the words underground animated anarchy, it does feel of a piece. Work sucks. There goes the neighbourhood. Shut up, Dillweed. Yeah, I like this advert quite a lot. Actually, there's not much not to like about Beavis and Butthead. He says, not having seen it for 25 years, I used to find it very funny. I'm sure there's all sorts of things that would make me cringe about now, but anyway. Okay, right, so on to page 9, another pretty radical scene change. We're not in the Ontic Sphere, we're not in the windmill, but we are back with our buddies George and Percy in Venice. What have they been up to all this time? Venice is raining, and Percy is very sad. It's really sad actually. So basically, do you remember in the previous issue, Percy had said to Mary, "You got to come visit," and Satan, Lucifer, had met Mary in the carriage, given her an apple in a kind of and I don't think I mentioned this at the time, but I think giving apples is like a kind of a Masonic sign stroke Illuminati sign of of recognition and welcoming. It's not just pleased to meet you, hope you guess my name kind of satanic vibe. There's another kind of secret society-ish kind of thing there, but it hasn't gone well. Satan remarked at the time, "Your baby doesn't look well," and she was like, "No, I'm sure it's fine," and it wasn't. Clara, the second daughter, I believe, of Mary and Percy Shelley, died in Venice shortly after Mary arrived. This all happened. This is all real stuff. And it's horrible. And Shelley's very sad. Everyone's very sad. Shelley's kind of, he's blaming himself because it's his fault, and he says, he kind of cruelly, but like, it's okay, everyone's upset, they understand. He cruelly says, you must be pleased, George. And George is like, what? How could I possibly be pleased that you've lost a child? Because I was sitting here talking of utopia, and you were saying there's no such thing as utopia. People just do whatever they just respond however their asses are being smacked, and his cynicism has been vindicated. And it's sad, yeah, it's really sad. And of course, like, Byron didn't think that, but Shelley's had a harsh lesson in, like, utopia versus reality here, because he thought that he kind of just wrote to Mary and said, just come to Venice, it's going to be awesome. We're going to, use our poetry and our minds and our relationship to create new ways of being for mankind, and it's going to be really, really awesome. And they do some awesome stuff on this trip, but they did lose their lovely little daughter Clara at the time, lovely little baby. So every silver lining has a cloud. George says, Mary and the Hopners are waiting for us on the Ponte dei Sospiri, the Bridge of Sighs. So we'll get to the Hopners in a bit, because they're not uninteresting. That's not the Bridge of Sighs. It's just not. Bridge of Sighs is closed over, and it links the Doge's Palace to the Doge's prison. And I'm sure it's not, I think it's like and Sospiri, obviously, sigh means you sigh as you are dragged off into the, never to see the beauty of Venice again. But yeah, the Bridge of Sighs is much prettier than that bridge, and it's closed over. It's like an indoor bridge, and it's beautifully designed, and yeah, you get a beautiful view of Venice from it. So the idea is, like, you see Venice for the last time as you're taken away, and you sigh because what a terrible thing to be in Venice but not be able to see it. Shelley also says, while I prattled of utopia, my child was dying of dysentery. I thought we were Leon and Sidna, unconquerable heroes of the struggle for liberty. Crumbs, I have got it written down here somewhere, but I'm going to get the name of the poem that Leon, like, typically Shelley is quoting his own poem, and Leon and Sidna come from Leon and Sidna. It was originally published called Leon and Sidna, then something like that, and the alternative title was something like the Vision of the Golden City, and then it was finally published under the title of The Revolt of Islam, but they didn't know anything about Islam really. So it's not kind of about Islam per se. Leon and Sidna are trying to liberate the holy city, basically. Pretty much all of the characters in Shelley's poetry are trying to liberate the holy city. He says here, on page 9, I thought we were Leon and Sidna, unconquerable heroes of the struggle for liberty. But see, we are only people after all. So Leon and Sidna is kind of like, anyone in any Shelley poem could be that. I would say that Shelley tries a little bit too hard to do like a Blakean vision thing in The Revolt of Islam, which is interesting because in the beginning of it, he gives a very, I'm sorry for this is the conclusion that I immediately jumped to, but also you would as well, because you're watching a podcast about the Invisibles, for goodness sake. The Revolt of Islam, the first canto, is devoted to a very, maybe it's the preface, but the first bit, the preface is about Mary, actually. This would have been written in 1817, very shortly before before Clara died. He gets abducted by aliens. He has a UFO encounter. It's very, very, very difficult for me to not read Shelley's description of in the first canto of The Revolt of Islam as his encounter with the UFO. There's a beautiful kind of silvery woman comes down out of a weird ship that's got wings, a winged ship, comes down out of it, takes him away, takes him off on this vision. Now, obviously, it's not weird for poets working in the kind of the tradition that Shelley belonged to start off their poems with like the muse coming to get them, but and show them this vision which they will then relate to us through the poetry. But yeah, I mean, read it. He gets abducted by aliens, and they give him this vision. So on the one hand, he's trying a bit hard to be Blakean. On the other hand, maybe it's completely authentic. Maybe maybe Shelley was abducted by aliens. You know, we've seen it happen in this comic to Dane and to Tom. We think when they were in the abandoned tube station in issue 2. People get, I know, spoilers, there's going to be more alien abductions in later episodes. I think Shelley got abducted, guys. Is what I'm saying. And under shadow, the Hopners and Mary await Percy to stop crying. Okay, so we're back in the castle in Silling on our next spread, pages 10 and 11. And we are given so the structure of the story of 120 Days of Sodom is like, it's almost like a kind of a pastiche of Canterbury Tales. It's like it's stories within stories within stories, people relating stories to each other. All of these stories are rude and horrible stories about what these Parisian madames have encountered through like the depths of perversity that these Parisian madames have encountered throughout their careers, and they're relating them to the 4 bad guys so that they can get pumped up and then go and go and rape all the people that they've kidnapped. So loads of 120 Days is these stories being related, and we get one here. The procuress matter, and this is being related by this woman who is one of the 4 whores, or 4 ugly crones rather, I think, who they've brought into the castle for the winter with them. Here she is here. She tells this story of the procuress, Madame Guérin, of whom I have spoken, set her eye on the daughter of an innkeeper in the Rue Saint-Denis. The Rue Saint-Denis is like the famous like red light district of like old Paris. Madame Guérin will get to her. The pious girl had resisted every seduction until Madame Guérin enticed her into the hands of a clergyman of 55 who had a remarkable talent for beguiling virgins into vice. I like this fellow already. In but 2 hours of conversation, that wasn't me. That's the judge in the comic. That wasn't me. In but 2 hours, she continues. In but 2 hours of conversation, this man was certain to turn the best behaved and most modest young lady into a perfect trollop, and yet he himself never once touched those placed in his charge. 2 hours in this man's company, that's all. The innkeeper's daughter arrived shortly thereafter at Madame Guérin's, eager to begin her work. There's guys, I hate to say it, there's a lot going on here. Because 120 Days is full of dozens, if not hundreds, of these dirty little stories. So why is this one here? Why are we given this one on this page now? Okay, so at the top of the page, before we even get to that, in bold script, no less, our narrator here for this little section, Duclos, remember, refers to the procuress Madame Guérin. Now, a bit like with Etienne last time, who we identified as Etienne Mahil, that we mentioned earlier, Madame Guérin was a real person. Now remember Madame Roland, who stands up before the guillotine in the last episode, and Lady Liberty all in shadow, and Roland gives her, who is also Orlando, by linguistic linkage, she gives her kind of like bon mot and admonishes Liberty as a figure and concept for allowing great travesties to be conducted in its name. Pardon me. Roland was a saloniste, right? She was a wealthy woman who kept a salon, which is to say she had parties, and cool people went to the parties and had cool ideas at these parties. And Madame Guérin was another one of these ones. In fact, Madame Guérin was almost the Madame Roland of the previous generation. She died in like the 1740s or something when Desaide, I know that I'm pronouncing that wrong, but I kind of always pronounce it like Jack Kirby, Desaide was he was kind of a young man, maybe 12 or something, when the real life Madame Guérin died. But she would have been one of the intellectual lights who was kind of leading the thought around him as a young boy, and as a kind of as a typical kind of teenage rebel and misogynist, he would have taken great pleasure, I believe, in taking her name in vain in 120 Days of Sodom, 120 Days of Sodom, rather. So, right, Madame Roland had her little coterie of salon guys who went, they were called salon guys, who went to her parties, read, spoke, shared ideas in spaces that were kind of free of papal and inquisitorial oversight and of royal oversight as well. Nonetheless, so they were the invisible cells of their day, right? Madame Guérin and her progressive, the further back in time, the less progressive they seem. Madame Guérin's circle was again like an invisible cell, a group of Illuminati-ish type guys, very well placed in society, kind of leading this kind of like enlightenment-ish kind of charge of ideas, which kind of have spread themselves through like Western European intellectual and cultural and political social history. So these are ideas like making sure that the new world, by which we kind of mean the wealth of the new world, right? Remember, they thought America was almost literally a new planet that you could set foot on. Making sure that place's wealth wasn't locked down by the power structures of Europe, which everyone could see, even those who benefited from them could see was not cool, was producing huge amounts of misery and corruption and corralling of wealth into very few hands, which people like Guérin and Roland and their circles would have been excluded from. Like, they were undoubtedly the smartest, and they weren't poor people, but they were definitely excluded from the highest echelons of power just by virtue of their birth. They were kind of early mid bourgeoisie, of course, who were beginning to kind of come into their power through these methods like the salon. So that's why we've got Madame Guérin here. So we're being told about not only Shelley and Byron as a historic invisible cell, not only Madame Roland as a earlier invisible cell, but even before her we have Madame Guérin's circle, based in Paris again. And so this story that Duclos is telling comes via Madame Guérin, and is a story about, and I did look this up in the book in 120 Days itself, and it is quite clear that this priest who has a remarkable talent for beguiling virgins into vice. It's made clear in the book that he only uses scriptural or ecclesiastical methods for doing this. He only uses what's in the Bible or what's in Christian teaching to turn these virgins into sex workers who go off and live in Madame Guérin's brothel. Can you imagine how grim a brothel was in Paris back then? So what the heck is all that about? Why is this the story that we've got here now? Now, there's a substrata of history here, and this history of ideas about America and about certain forms of limited democracy and about the way that untying money from land and tying money into idea or idea, like the recipes of labor, if you like, whether that recipe is owning a factory or owning a bank of robots or data collecting apps. This is like a thread of ideas which does come from Guérin's time, right? This is all about that thread, and even as an earlier allusion to in history, of course, one of the other big themes was human liberation, insofar as rights for women, basically rights for women. One of the threads goes deep into French history again with the Catars, right? They were kind of like Gnostic Christians, like a big ass like chunk of them in like medieval France around. What are we going to say here? When were the Cathars? You should have looked this one up, Bobs. I'm going to say they're around the 12th or 13th century. Not too far away, historically, from Roland, Orlando, the original knight who was responsible for kind of the political dealings which hived off the kind of the northwest corner of France from, the Iberian Peninsula, and kind of helped to coagulate that into France. Yeah. South of that, kind of closer towards the Spanish border, you had this hotbed of a non-papal religious heresy called the Cathars, who basically they were pretty heavily. They're still around actually. They had a spot in my old stamping ground of Glastonbury up until a few years ago. They had it for about a year. It didn't do well, but there were people trying to kind of go for it. They were, heterodox Gnostic Christians. So they basically what that means is they didn't bow their knee to Rome, and you can kind of look broadly into their history, but because it only ever comes from the people who actually waged a crusade against them and exterminated them, literally, the history is very kind of partial and unfair. So there's all sorts of like rumors about what the Cathar heresy was, what their kind of what their crime against. No, because obviously the Pope isn't going to say, well, they won't pay me their taxes. He's going to say, no, they're sinning against God, and so they came up with all sorts of ideas. Why? Loads of stuff about sex, loads of stuff about drugs. It seems most likely, though, is that women were given equal property rights. That's probably, loads of stuff about Satan. But it seems probably the main thing that they were into was some kind of like Johannite Marian heresy, meaning that they sort of thought that John the Baptist was probably as important in Christian mythology as Jesus was, and ditto for Mary, yeah. And the Pope wasn't down with that at all. So, and the Pope had the King of France on his side, or the King of what was France then on his side. So they, the Albigensian Crusade went on for, decades or whatever, but it succeeded in wiping out in this very sort of dramatic hilltop siege story. Ended up hilltop? Get it? Castles in hilltops. Pay attention. Castles, Sillings. They ended up getting wiped out, but not before escaping with their treasure, right? So that's another huge theme of French-focused counter-history that is yet biblical, right? So they, like, the Cathars would have said, yeah, we're Christians just like you, but they kind of would have read around the lines of what is implied by the scripture and come up with a radically different set of, like, precepts with which to live. Basically, I think probably the one that authorities really didn't like historically, and still aren't that keen on, let's be honest, is equal rights for women. Back then, it would have meant property rights for women, and kind of some kind of high level representation. Obviously, nobody was kind of voting back then anyway, so it wasn't. Although maybe, yeah, that's the other thing, right? So maybe the Cathar heresy was democracy, right? Yeah, maybe it was like maybe that's why they were able to. Maybe that's why the Pope was able to swing the king against them so easily. Again, we don't really know because the real reasons have been carefully suppressed. Probably not. There's probably some records which are fairly reliable, but that's not. But that's fact. That's not history. Yeah. This is about history. This is about where this undercurrent of invisible ideas came from, and it's quite a heavy allusion here to that, I believe. So this. The Duke guy here from the castle goes, I'll wager this man was a bugger. And it's like, he wasn't, he was a Cathar. Cathars and, then like Templars, whatever. Homosexuality was like, oh, that's why we're after the Cathars, really. It's because they're gay. So this is all about that, right? The reason that we're getting this story now. It's almost like, imagine Grant Morrison is trying to get initiated into some kind of like high-level Masonic lodge, stroke Illuminati, like global ancient Illuminati conspiracy. And one of the things that they've set as an entrance exam is that you have to prove that you know about codes and that you have to prove that you know about Illuminati history. He's done it with this page here, right? I'm not saying that that's what Grant Morrison was up to, but there's the invisible thread that I'm always talking about in this issue. Sorry, in this comic, in the Invisibles itself. In this issue, is here. It's right here on this page. We lead on from that page, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant. We lead on from that page. Love this comic. You should too. I know you do. Then we lead on. We've got this other kind of interesting kind of like history warping thing. This kind of like dream logic happens because our baddies, our banker and our judge and our duke. I don't see the king. Oh yeah, our bishop and the duke. Yeah, they're all there. They're branding these children as their property, right? And they're branding them with branding irons, but the marks that they're leaving are barcodes. Okay, now this was a big thing in the 90s, was that barcodes were the mark of the beast from the book of Revelation. Now, the reason that people think that is brilliant, frankly, this meme really took off in 1993, which would have been in plenty of time for it to have made it into here, in Mike Leigh's film, Naked. I don't know if you've seen it, but basically it's a really good film about a guy who is pretty much a mashup of Jack Frost and King Mob with a Mancunian accent, walking around London, calling Londoners dicks. Basically, it's brilliant. It's just really, really entertaining. One of the things that he does, he kind of corners this like security guard working like a thankless kind of Docklands like monkey job. He corners him and starts ranting to him about biblical end of the world conspiracies, from Revelation. And he goes on this big old thing about how this stems from, pretty sure this stems from like, America, basically, American evangelism. That the barcodes, we've got one right here, barcodes are based on 666. They're the mark of the beast. And, and there's a thing about how neither will one be able to buy or sell anything without this mark. And then suddenly, in the 90s, this mark started, like, in the run-up to the millennium, no less, this mark started appearing on stuff. Although we had them before, suddenly they're everywhere. And literally, the guy in the supermarket goes, beep, beep. And as if by magic, the till knows what you've just bought. And obviously that data is all stored. It's really quaint to think how kind of shocking that was at the time. But it really did make people think and go, hang on, how are these stripes here? How do they translate into the supermarket knows everything that I'm buying and how much it is? How does that work? It doesn't really matter how much it works, but the way that they worked out that it was, so it's good, right? Obviously, in order for the laser, we're so used to barcodes now, we don't even think about how they work. But in order for the laser to sort of read the spacings between the black lines, the spacings of the white lines and the black lines, or the non-black lines and the black lines, it has to be readable in either direction. So every barcode is identical. The data is only in half of the barcode, and then the other half is like the mirror reflection. So the reader can read it that way and that way, and it still says the same thing. Now, it uses like key lines to spot where the barcode begins and ends. And obviously, because it's mirrored, there's one in the middle as well. So it uses it uses a bit on the end, a bit in the middle, and a bit on the other end to tell the computer where the barcode begins and ends. And each of these things happen to look a lot like the stripe, the width and type of stripe that barcodes also use for the number 6, right? So in every barcode, so each one of these lines means a number, and in a barcode you've always got a 6 at the start, a 6 in the middle, and a 6 at the end. So it is always based on 3 6s. So it is the mark of the beast, and people notice this. And Mike and Johnny's character in Naked starts ranting about it in a very sort of like dramatic amped up moment, which kind of reveals to us that this kind of like sage from this kind of like earthy sage from Manchester who's come to London to kind of bring the truth to the Southern softies. It's totally Shelley versus Byron, Blur versus Oasis again. Like you learn that he's kind of like apocalyptically mad because he goes off with extreme conviction. It's very powerful, very brilliantly acted by David Thewlis. Goes off on this kind of hapless security guard guy about the coming storm, about the end of the world and how it's imminent. And the way he does it is with barcodes, because this guy is the security guy is running around a building, zapping barcodes to prove that the security survey, the regular security sweep of the building is being conducted. And it's terribly exciting, and it definitely is finding its way into this. And so at the time, everybody thought that barcodes were the mark of the beast, and that it was a kind of a satanic, literally, stamp used to convert material items into property, right? Into not just property, but commodity. Things that could be bought and sold. Things that could not be bought or sold by any other means, in fact. And this is what they're doing to the slaves here. Not the slaves, sorry, the kidnappees. The people that that the bad guys have got stuck in the castle with them, who they're raping and torturing. For shits and giggles. This one's ready to be made use of. His virtues but a commodity now, as it should be. It is said as the brand. So obviously branding, yeah, we know, and the idea of branding as another means of marketing and of convincing people to buy your commodity was in its early-ish stages now, or was at least about to really kind of the theory of it by going digital was really just about to kind of unleash its own power upon the way that we structure our economies, blah blah blah. And they were, and these guys are doing it kind of in a very literal sense. They're branding in as painful and intrusive and non-consensual a way as possible their property with this brand. So it's bringing the kind of the depths of the stakes from the bad guy side into relief for us here. Is that they want to satanically, let's remember, turn every human being into a commodity whose virtue can be used by them. And it's also like a symbolic act of, by taking possession of their body and turning them into this commodity form, like cattle, the very concept of freedom is burned from their minds. This is only the beginning. And then the bishop goes on this classic 90s conspiracy rant. This is only the beginning of it. I fancy there will be electronic tagging of newborns next, and banks of DNA fingerprinting files, all in the name of law and order. There's literally a TV show called Law and Order, and they always solve their crimes by that, right? You're going to say, no, sometimes they solve it through other means. I've never seen an episode of Law and Order, and I know what happens. They use DNA every time. It's important to know, this is the bishop again, it's important to know exactly where one's property is and what mischief it's getting up to. And there's a weird thing here. One of the victims here is dressed up as a rabbit in a kind of a shining sort of way with a rabbity mask, and they're playing with a wee poodle. I think most of this is in the book, actually. The wee poodle will remind you of the poodle from the Fool card in the tarot, won't it? And the way that's being used as one of the items here, that kind of fool sense of infinite possibility and kind of unformed universe being presented to the bishop and being held by the evil Madame Storyteller, principle of freedom in the universe. There's all sorts of great stuff going on in this little spread. That's just pages 10 and 11. Whew, let's go over. Right, great. Watching all of this from, this is really grim stuff. These kids are being tortured and they're having shit thrown all over them and stuff. And up in the rafters, Desade, this is his vision, remember, he created this. He'd written all of this beforehand. And Mob and Boy are watching it. And Boy's like, oh, this is grim. It's like this whole film, and the Mike Leigh connection is almost deliberate. This whole thing really does feel like a kind of a gritty kitchen sink 90s art house movie where you have to watch it because you sort of do. It's sort of your duty, but you're kind of a bit you're a bit bored and grossed out by it, and that's what Boy's doing. Whereas King Mob is kind of like trying to think about what this is all about, but also aware that he's kind of being titillated by just the edginess of the whole thing. And Desade is like because Boy goes, this is sick. Desade is really like, yeah, it is, but I had good reasons, honest. And he says, I tried to show them where it would all end, the hypocrisy of the Enlightenment. This is a really as I said last time in the previous episode, one of the problems that we've got here is that it's important to separate Desade the man from Desade the work, and what this is doing is collapsing them back together again and saying that the man is the work, or using the man as a kind of a symbol for the work. And it's a bit like, that doesn't really work very well. That's the kind of thing that would have seemed really smart in the 90s, and now is a bit because critical theory and historiography have just got a bit better. Got a lot better compared to other 20-year chunks of history. It's been a very rapid and radical period of advancement of human knowledge. Remember, we can see that kind of doesn't necessarily help the narrative scheme here. That as useful as Desade's ideas might be, this way to present them isn't terribly good. So using him as to ventriloquize his own ideas, when actually that's better left to his subsequent interpreters, we kind of don't get. Anyway, but this is what a lot of invisible philosophy is about. I tried to show them where it would all lead, the hypocrisy of the Enlightenment. These are the monsters bred by the god of reason. Remember, Shelley was talking about the god of reason before, about how that was the tool by which man would break his chains. This is to say it again. Idealists and reformers all become executioners in their turn. The road to utopia ends with the steps of the scaffold, the endless moment of the guillotine. So Morrison is he's plotting out his philosophy here in pretty upfront terms. It's fair enough for him to be this kind of clear with the audience. What am I going to say next? Okay, so it's kind of a bit. It kind of doesn't. Okay, it doesn't quite work for reasons we'll get into. But on the other hand, it is internally coherent, right? It's fine. And then King Mob goes, because he's a 90s legend. Come off it. Why don't you admit you're just a dirty old sod? And he's like, well, that too. So really good writing to be able to kind of find the hypocrisy in this railing against hypocrisy, and also break this kind of grim moment with some humour. It's really good. 16 years in prison with only a wooden pole to shove up my arse for a little fun. That and my pen and paper and my imagination. I wanted revenge. I wanted to wreck the world and shit in the ruins. Holy Bible, yeah? Come on.